on air. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active large-scale Scrum community and business network, originated in New York City and went global. We are in the studio with Lu Yu, and he's the expert in organizational design and consulting from China. And he will now take the control of this discussion over. Over to you, Lou. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gene, and everybody having me here to share some of my recent work. Actually, well, in the email, it said that the session is called Continuous Improvement Inspired by LeSS Experiments, but now you see a different one. Actually, they are the same. So I just use a different title while I had this in a workshop format in the recent LeSS conference in Madrid. So I call it Beyond Adopting Frameworks. Well, essentially, well, this is the way that I look at LeSS. So LeSS is more than a framework in my view, and actually, essentially, it has two big parts. So one is I call it framework focus. So frameworks, rules, guides, principles, and we have been actually sharing a lot about how we adopt a framework. So this is not the focus of today's sharing, but I'm going to put more focus on the another big portion. I call it experiment focus. So essentially, these frameworks for experiments, they are all supposed to help improve large-scale product development. So the purpose is the same for both approaches. And even though that we are going to focus on experiment-focused approach this time, but I will start with framework focus shortly, and especially talking about some of the limitations with this framework focus. So let's start with this framework focus. And interestingly, even though that we are going to talk about frameworks, so we still need to start with the experiments, because as you probably know, that frameworks got created out of those experiments. So not sure if you've seen these framework 1 and framework 2. Those are very close to today. It's called LeSS and LeSS huge frameworks. But when it was initially presented, they were actually presented as experiments. So even though they were called frameworks, in a sense, they were not real frameworks because these are just ideas to try. Framework 1 for up to 10 teams. Now, if you think about LeSS versus LeSS huge, it's 8 teams, but it's sort of similar within their range. And framework 2 just corresponding to the LeSS huge framework for many teams, up to more than 8 teams in the current framework. But in this experiment, it just says up to 10 teams for framework 1, and it's more than 10 teams for framework 2. What's interesting is there's actually, even though they look quite similar, there's one major difference, which is well captured in a different experiment. This is kind of overarching one. It's sort of acting as a comment, is a meta comment. It says essentially it says all the experiments coming from the first 2 LeSS books, they were all experiments. They were just ideas to try or avoid. So these are not acted as a rules that asking people to follow. So why? Actually, Bass and Craig wrote it clearly. They said systems are too complex and variable to assume prescriptive advice will work. So they were not supposed to be taken as a prescriptive advice. to be taken as rules to follow. So this is a major difference. But somehow, at some point, it seems that Bass and Krieger changes their mind. So they still decide to turning those experiments into real frameworks consisting of rules and guides and so on. So so why did they change their mind and still decide to formalize these two experiments into real frameworks? This is their explanation. So it's related to Suhari's model of learning. So as a novice group, when you learn something new, then you want to actually have some guides, have some rules to follow. So this is corresponding to the Su level, so-called. For the novice group, we want to start with certain rules that we can copy, we can follow. Then when you gain more and more experience, then you start to reach into the next level, which is hard. So meaning that you start to break certain rules and eventually get into the where you create your own rules. So LeSS as a framework acts as a starting point. That's the reason. But then by formalizing the framework 1 and 2 into less and less huge frameworks, it helps to some extent, but then it also introduced a few kind of limitations or pitfalls I'm going to explain. So this is the first one. I can improvement continuity, because the framework is often associated with like a transformation or change project, and then it often leads to the situation where the improvement is stopped when change project is over. People often ask that since it's a framework, we adopt a framework. When should we get it done? I mean, that's a kind of fair question. But the thinking is against the idea of continuous improvement. Because for less adoption, it's a bit weird even. So we often say that there's the only beginning, there's no end. But that's kind of inevitable when you introduce some framework. People have the kind of already know, well, frameworks, there are quite many frameworks. So when we adopt it, at some point we get it done. So in LeSS, actually, LeSS had an explicit principle, which is called continuous improvement towards perfection, try to counter this misconception. So it's just a continuous improvement towards perfection. It never ends. So sometimes I put it another way. I call it experiment after framework, meaning that initially we focus on adopting the framework, but after a while, then it just becomes a continuous experiment till forever. So I call it experiment after framework. So this is the first thing. The second thing we need to be kind of cautious about when we adopt a framework it is about ownership. So frameworks ready-made solutions in a way. It tries to solve certain problems, challenges. Recently, actually, Bas commented that every rule in the LeSS framework is try to tackle one of the common dysfunctions, organizational dysfunctions. So, like any rules is sort of a solution for a common problem. But this solution is created by someone else, so it may affect the ownership, right? So if we do this thing, do this improvement, we've gone through the whole reasoning process, the whole learning process, and come up with the solution. Then that has a kind of the most ownership inside that. But if it's a kind of given solution, then quite often we think of adopting this solution may act as a goal in itself. So this is something that we need to cautious about. And let's try to tackle this pitfall in two ways. One is as same as Scrum, we define this framework very sufficient so that we leave rooms for the people who are working there to evolve the way of working. The second, we do various courses, for example, certified LeSS practitioner courses, where we try to do lots of system modeling to help participants actually do the reasoning on their own, so that they get this own, not rent, the kind of mindset. So this is the second thing that we need to cautious about. The third one is I call it mismatch capability. So if you look at what's in the framework, it's essentially a bunch of changes. So it's actually a big batch. If you think about adopting LeSS framework, it will means, for example, you wanna transform or transition from component team to feature team. Not only that, but you also want to have multiple feature teams sharing one backlog. You want to shift the focus from management, from the specific scope of the product to the improving the organizational system, and so on. So it's quite many changes at once, actually. And to dealing with that big batch of changes, it requires high change capability, which is often missing in the organizations as they would like to adopt LeSS. So what happens? Well, in one situation, it could be that they start to look kind of get help from external, and that's one way to deal with this mismatch. But sometimes for some organizations, it's just not feasible. Then they need to in some way build up their own improvement capability. How do you do that? Actually, you can look for experiments, because the experiments actually provide a wonderful opportunity for you to develop your change capability. So this is what I call experiment before framework. So before adopting a framework, you do experiments in order to build up your change capability. Then after the framework, you continuously doing this experiment in order to sustain your change. It's kind of like you continuously improve by doing all those experiments forever. Regardless of whether we do the experiments before or after, and we would like to elaborate how we make best use of the experiments. So this is a major part. Okay, so we still have this issue of like we have a bunch of experiments. It's actually more than 600 experiments. So the initial challenge was which experiments to start. Well, we can use the LeSS framework approach, meaning that we can first look at those experiments which is related to what's prescribed in the LeSS framework, but you take them piece by piece. You don't take the framework, all the changes at once. You can pick up one experiment, for example, you create one feature team to start experimenting. So that could be an approach, could be a working approach. And but I would like to actually introduce a different approach, which is more related to or connected to the continuous improvement. So this is what I call continuous improvement inspired by LeSS experiments. But there are two parts here. One is just continuous improvement. Sometimes to just differentiate, make a differentiation, I just call it continuous improvement as usual. Then the second, you add something, meaning that while you do continuous improvement, you try to get some inspiration from the LeSS experiments. I'm going to elaborate. So firstly, we look at continuous improvement. And actually, this is not a new thing. Actually, it's out of in a way, it's quite simple idea. So in my view, that if you want to start continuous improvement, you do two things. One is to set up a pace or cadence. It could be based on the calendar, yearly, weekly, monthly, weekly, and so on. So we set up a pace, and every now and then we look at our challenges and problems. You do a bit prioritization, pick up the most pressing problems, and those becomes the target for you to improve. So we may apply PDCA for them. So that's continuous improvement. And once you select an improvement topic, you define the problem. Usually, you define problem to illustrate the gap between your current reality and your future state. So that's a problem definition. Then after that, you will usually do some analysis and come up with some actions, right? So the actions, the improvement actions, are essentially experiments, because that these are based on certain hypotheses. Of course, you expect that by doing this improvement action with certain logic, and it will eventually help you solve this problem. So this is one meaning of this experiment. The second meaning here is actually this is a place where we can get some idea from LeSS experiments. So we can incorporate the learning of LeSS experiments into the PDCA cycle. And it's specifically the planning part of the analysis part. So I'm going to later elaborate this approach by making some demonstration. But firstly, we look at if we would like to learn from LeSS experiments, what do we learn about? So we can learn LeSS experiments as some kind of solution, right? Try something, that something becomes a solution. We try to copy the solution in our environment. But this is not a good way of learning LeSS experiments. To me, it's the most essential part of those LeSS experiments is actually it's reasoning. So what kind of problem does it try to solve, and in which logic? What are the variables? What are the factors involved in the experiments? What are the dynamics behind those experiments, and so on? So the reasoning is really the key, and we can actually put that reasoning and together with the analysis for your own problem, and we put them together, we model them together, and I call it we let the problem and related experiment like meet. We let them meet in one system model, so that we can learn the best from those experiments. We can use those insights to refine our problems and refine our improvement actions and so on. So this is essentially what I call continuous improvement inspired by LeSS experiments. I'm going to do a demonstration, and I will use Mirrorbot and just while I talk, I also model in the meantime. So the problem that I picked, or the improvement topic I picked is the lexical. Let's say we have this problem. We have too much lexical, and they slow us down. So that could be a common problem. Well, first step is, well, we may even have some ideas how to improve them. Well, the most obvious one would be we just rewrite the lexical, right? So then for this one, oh, actually, this is good. This is, even though I call it a continuous improvement as usual, but it's still good. It's still try to improve things. Then, well, if we look at this problem and the usual action, and how are we going to model that? So firstly, well, we start with the problem. Well, too much lexical. So the lexical probably is one of the variables that we can use. So I change it to the mirror ball. Can you see my mirror ball?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, let's say I put it as one variable. I simply call it amount of lexical. We want to actually model this logic. So what does it lead to? Lexical slows us down. So I may create another variable. I simply call it, let's say, development speed. So here's our thinking. So if we get more lexical, the speed, our development speed will be slow. So that's a minus. Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's look at our action. So this is a problem, right? This describes our problem, just in a different format. Well, essentially captures the same logic. But what's this action? Rewrite lexical. So we have amount of lexical, rewrite lexical. Well, it seems that well, in a way, it actually tried to change this variable amount of lexical through clean up, right? Cleaning up. So I can actually make this variable also explicit. The way I say cleaned lexical. So here's the logic. We clean up more, and the amount of lexical. Well, if we add cleaned lexical, then probably we can make this one also explicit. So this one actually means the existing lexical, right? So if we clean up more, then the existing one lexical will be decreased. Then eventually increase our development speed. So that's the logic. So this is the first step to model just your current thinking. Shall I check what's in the chat? Okay. Okay, so this is a place actually after you modeled your kind of the thinking that you already have, and now it's the time to open your book, right? So we have the first two LeSS books, and actually you find that for this particular improvement topic, lexical, there's a chapter for that topic from the second LeSS book, and you actually open up there, you try to browse what's in that chapter, and you found that actually all those experiments are captured in two parts. So one is how to avoid writing new lexical. The other is I've already got a lexical, what to do with that. So that actually gives you some insights. You find that actually, if you look at this model, you found that well, on one hand, we clean up lexical so that we make the we decrease the amount of existing lexical. But on the other hand, we also would like to see how can we avoid writing new lexical. This is an insight. So we would like to capture that actually in the same system model. New lexical, it seems a different variable, right? So we can say, okay, not only existing lexical, we have new lexical. So not only the clean lexical will affect the existing lexical, but also the new lexical. So if we have more new lexical, then we have more existing lexical, right? So this is a way that you capture your insight and put that into the same system model. Okay. Well, we don't have to go through all the details of those experiments yet. We just capture the big idea firstly. But then after that, you probably would like to, because we have a bunch of those experiments, and you had this idea of rewrite lexical. You may wonder whether a LeSS experiment has something similar, like rewrite lexical. So this is probably your next target of learning, and you actually find one in this part. So I've got Lexi. Now what? And there's indeed one experiment which is related to rewriting lexical. But interestingly, it says avoid. So this is something that we would like to do, but why in LeSS experiment it says avoid? Then you read further, and what's the logic or what's the thinking behind? You actually find that it says, well, here's the lexical. If you only focus on the clean up the lexical, but not pay attention to avoid creating new lexical, you never get this problem solved. Right? This is sort of like this idea of stock and flow. So if you are familiar with, because this is called CLD, there's a different tool, which is a bit more advanced system modeling tool, which is called stock and flow diagram, which actually makes a differentiation for the variables. So some of the variables act as a stock, other variables act as a flow. Then here, it's a great place to show that differentiation. So the existing lexical code is actually stock. Then clean lexical is actually the outflow, right? But there's the inflow, right? The inflow is you create a new lexical. So, well, if you only manage the outflow without paying attention to the inflow, and the stock actually will, every now and then you probably you reduce the stock by cleaning up, but over time you find that it's getting back because that we keep creating new lexical. So this is another insight that you capture, but it's already here. Since we model this new lexical, it's become very clear that in order to deal with the existing lexical problem, we need to work on both sides, inflow and outflow. Okay, so we move on. We open up this first category. So avoid creating lexical. You find there are quite many experiments associated with that. And you found that actually it's categorized into two parts. So related to two major reasons or causes of lexical. One is unrealistic deadlines with fixed content. The second is poor development skill. Let's model that. So if we have, let's say, we are talking about the causes to this new lexical. So one is called the unrealistic schedule. We may model it as realistic. I don't know if there's this word in our schedule. Let's see how realistic our schedules is. And the other cause is developer skills. So that one is simple, right? So essentially it says, well, this will cause new lexical, And if we have stronger, then we have lower new lexical. So we stronger and fewer and development skill will get up. And another one is here. So if it's more more realistic, and we create less new lexical. Of course, we can expand that logic. For example, here we say, oh, how does this realistic or unrealistic schedule actually create more lexical? We may add something in between. Let's say what happens is if it's unrealistic, we get more pressure for our developers. Or the developers may do a couple of things. So one is maybe we take more shortcut. Those quality destroying shortcuts. And let's say let's add this. So if it's realistic, more realistic, then should be less pressure. Less pressure. Shortcut, few shortcuts. Few shortcuts, less new lexical. So if you look at this link, essentially it's an expansion of this link. So after we've expanded that link, then we can remove the initial link. So you may, depending on whether this is quite obvious or like if you do that in a group, then depending on whether this part needs some refinement. If it requires, then we open that up. Otherwise, we keep it simple. So this could be the learning from looking at two major causes of lexical, right? Then after that, we want to actually dig deeper. We look at the details within those experiments. So the first one, let's say we already have this realistic, whether this is realistic or not, it actually creates more lexical. If unrealistic schedule actually creates more lexical. Then you look at the avoid and try experiments related to unrealistic deadlines. You find that actually, besides this, there's more. So the development speed actually, here development speed is more, it's not efficiency. It's more about end-to-end cycle time. So if we have short cycle time, actually it creates more transparency. The transparency is good for the custom collaboration. If we have good custom collaboration, it actually helps us creating more realistic schedule. So that actually okay. So if you look at here, now there's a loop. Okay, if we have more lexical, then we create new lexical, and we have more existing lexical. It slows us down, and transparency got dropped, and we have bad custom collaboration, which leads to more unrealistic schedule. which leads to more pressure and more shortcuts and more new lexical. So if you look at here, there's one minus and another minus, so it's an even number of minus link, and that's essentially creates a reinforcing loop, right? So this is something that you actually read what's in the book, what's in the experiment, and you capture that in the same model. And then you do for other experiments, similar things. Like there's a bunch of experiments related to development skills. And you found that, for example, avoid hiring many weak developers. So you may think about, by looking at these experiments, come up with a set of variables that will affect the development skills. For example, maybe one of them would be hiring standard about development skills. Developers about development skills. It could be, let's say, try increase the organizational support for learning development skills. So you may add that initially, just add organizational support. And while you read further, you find that what's the meaning of organization support? What kind of organization support are we talking about? So then you actually replace this with more fine-grained variables. And so on. So perhaps it's enough as a demo, but eventually, after doing this, and you get to the step where you want to actually step back and look at the model and say, okay, with this new understanding, what is the problem that we would like to solve? Right? It may lead your refining your problems. Say initially you want to solve this too much legacy code. And after you analyze this and by getting ideas from less experiments, you found that what you want to solve right now is with this new insight is probably these two causes. So unrealistic deadlines and poor development skills. And then you come up with different actions. So if you look at this model, actually, you may find that every variable can be a problem. It can also be a cause. So it really depends on different level of problems and actions. And improvement actions, you may decide that maybe we should strengthen our definition of done, because we would like to tackle this reinforcing loop, because it's a vicious cycle here, and so on. So this is the way that I have been actually experimenting, also making recommendations that you can, if you already have a continuous improvement in place, you're already doing this PDCA stuff, then you can actually, while you plan, you analyze the problem, beyond doing that kind of with your current thinking, and you purposefully reference to the LeSS experiments or the related LeSS experiments, and try to incorporate that learning into the same system model for the analysis. Let me check what's in the chat. Okay. Okay. Let me conclude with two things. Then we can have a short Q&A. So the first thing is, earlier I said we can do the experiment before the framework or after framework. Before the framework, the focus is to improve our change capability, because by doing experiment, actually it helps us increase the quality of our thinking, and that's good for the capability. And by doing the experiment after the framework, our purpose is to continuously improve. So try to avoid the situation where the framework adoption is done, then we just stop our continuous improvement. So in order to sustain that improvement, then we do continuously continuously experiment. And I actually thought about this further. If we do experiment before and after, why we don't simply do the experiment? Some experiments are just big, other experiments are small. So framework essentially just a big organizational experiment. So it's likely, especially for some organizations where you don't like any framework, you don't want to introduce or adopt any framework, then we can present LeSS as a series of experiments. Some are just big, related to organization, others are small, more at practice level, and so on. So we can, so there are two scenarios. One is we do experiment first, then we adopt a framework, then we continuously doing the experiment. The other scenario would be just experiment only. We just keep doing that. So that's one thing. The second thing is when we say we can get inspired from the LeSS experiments, how can we do that? This what I have just presented and demoed is a structural way to get inspired. So what's really essential is not really about those those things that you try or avoid. Those things are just a solution. But what's really important is we learn about the variables and links and loops. Once you've learned that those variables, you will find that actually you can create your own experiment. But you already captured the essence of those LeSS experiments. For example, let's say, okay, you now know development skill is one of the key causes that helped you address this legacy code problem. Then you will not only look at the existing LeSS experiments, but also create your own things. In your environment, what affects this development skill? And let's say some of those LeSS experiments say, oh, you need to work on the motivation of learning. Then you can analyze, well, motivation is a variable. Then you can analyze on your own what kind of factors actually affect the motivation of our developers. And you create experiments on your own. So the main learning is about those variables and links and loops. Yeah, that's about it. And some reference and so on. So I think we have about 5 minutes. Probably we can have a short conversation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lou, for this presentation, and thank you everyone who stayed on and listened. Folks, we got a few minutes remaining, so if you would like to ask some questions or make comments, please go ahead and do so.
Yes, please. Yeah, I noticed the raising hand.
Yeah, we're probably too late in the day for us here in the Eastern time zone, so people are probably very shy and
no, I noticed the raising hand from Trey.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know how to
Chetan, please
pronounce.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jen and Yilu, for the very good presentation. My question is like the frameworks are being proven, tested, and like it is a standard industry practice in different sectors and domains. So basically, people might think that experimentation might take some time, but this framework has been tested and proven in so and so industry. So wouldn't you think like the framework would have a priority in ahead of experimentation?
Uh, yeah, this is a great question. So, let me. Yeah. So this is actually what this framework is trying to solve. So it provides a starting point so that it's as you just said, it's more proven than if you as a novice group and you don't know where to start, and framework could be the place. But it also comes with certain pitfalls or limitations. So depending on where you are, and sometimes while you have already some improvement capability, and you decide that meanwhile you may also able to get some external help, and you may take this framework as the first step. So you just jump into the framework, and then it helps you get started. And but one of the point is so this is eventually about continuous improvement. So even though that you've implement what's in the framework, and it doesn't mean that you end your improvement. So you can still carry on with this approach by looking at more experiment.
So you mean to say like to before choosing any framework, we need to experiment a lot to understand which framework would be better for our organization?
Well, not really. So there are two things here. So one is well, here what I say is you adopt a framework. Let's say you adopt that framework, but you don't kind of end your adoption, and but you continuously improving by keeping experimenting. So that's one thing. Another thing is suppose that you feel that what's in the framework is kind of overwhelming and it's a lot, and it doesn't match your change capability. You are not able to deal with so many changes at once. Then you may start with experimenting, pick smaller changes and doing some experiment. Meanwhile, building up your capability to deal with changes. Because what's in the framework is essentially a bunch of changes.
Okay,
That's
but
my view.
suppose as an Scrum Master or Agile coach, a person has worked in previous companies and successfully worked with different frameworks like Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, or Safe, or this anything. So, do they still have to experiment whether that framework will work in the current company, or the based on their background and experience they have with different framework, they can directly jump into that particular framework?
Uh, Possible. Well, if for example, you see that there's a solid consensus. So after explaining this, there's a already consensus to say, oh, this is the way we would like to go. Then you jump into the framework because that's all okay. Sometimes it's not the case. People are just hesitant and not sure whether this is the way to go. Then in that case, we may start with some experiments.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much for your time to answer.
Thank you for the
Welcome.
question, Chetan. Folks, we're actually at the hour, so we need to wrap up. And because for Lou, it's actually the beginning of the day, and I'm sure he's got places to go and things to do. So I want to personally thank you very much for doing this, coming out in this at this early hour for you in the morning, and you know, having this conversation and making this great presentation. I'm going to hopefully successfully have a recording available in the next day or two, and those that could make it, as usual, please check out the usual location later. I'll be sharing the link. And Lou, of course, you're going to share your materials via email so I can include them. Thank you very much for coming out, folks. Enjoy your evening or whichever part of the day you're in. I think you all are in the US, give or take. And give or take the time zone. And have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.
See you. Thank you. Thank you, Gene.
Very
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.